Hey everyone, welcome to the Redefining HR podcast. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt, and today I'm really excited to be sitting down with Beth Steinberg. Beth is the SVP of People and Talent at Chime. She's a friend, we go way back, and I've always appreciated her approach to leadership in the people space, and so I'm really excited to finally be sitting down with her for an episode of Redefining HR. So Beth, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Let's start off with an intro. Why don't you just give a little bit of background on yourself for the listeners and viewers?
Great. Thank you, Lars, and thank you so much for having me here. So as Lars said, I'm the SVP of People and Talent at Chime. Chime is a financial services company that is aiming to make things better for everyday people through our products and services. And I have been with Chime for, about 2.5 years, a little over 2 years. And I've had a lot of roles prior to coming at Chime at both Fortune 500 companies and emerging companies. Those companies include Sunrun and Brightroll and Facebook in the early days, and then larger companies like Nordstrom, EA, and Nike. I would say, I'm a builder of things. I like to solve hard problems. I don't like to have a playbook. I like to try to do things in a different way that's going to make an impact. And that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. And so you mentioned some of the companies you've worked at over your career. I know you started your career at Nordstrom and you've spent your entire career in HR. Let's go to the beginning. What originally drew you to HR?
Yeah, well, at Nordstrom, I didn't start in HR. I started in, a number of different sales positions through college and then buying positions. And during that time, I was in college and then I went to graduate school and I was aiming to get my master's and PhD in clinical psychology. I really thought my entire life I'd be a clinical psychologist. Some of my family members who I admired greatly were in the field and I thought it would be a great place for me. And as I was in graduate school with kind of zero life experience, very young, I realized that I needed more work experience and life experience to be a good therapist. And at that time, Nordstrom was opening up a new region in the Midwest, in the Chicago area. And they asked me if I would be interested in going and opening up the new region. And I decided to take a chance and do it. So I moved from sunny San Diego, where I was in graduate school, to freezing Chicago in the middle of winter. But it happened to be an incredible move for me because I was able to learn so much about, building companies around good cultures, hiring in such a short time period. And at Nordstrom, during my time there, I probably hired over 10,000 employees. Trained, thousands of managers, and was really able to understand how important it is to align your values with the company that you work at. So that was my HR origination story.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, early days at Facebook, Electronic Arts, Zenefits, Nike, you have a roster of companies that you've worked for. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take Chime off the table for this next question, just for fairness.
Sure.
But looking back in your career, what role do you think you had the most fun in, and what made it so special for you?
Yeah, I've had a lot of great roles and worked with so many great leaders. I feel incredibly grateful for that. I really think the role that I made a just huge impact in and had an incredible amount of fun in was actually Sunrun. And Sunrun is a residential solar company, I think the largest in the United States at this point. But when I started at Sunrun, there were only 75 people. there was amazing people because it was such a mission-driven, innovative company. I mean, that was 2011, 2012, when solar was really just, on the forefront of things. It was not mainstream like it is today. And the people at Sunrun were committed like I've never seen before to really making an impact. And because of that, myself and my team were able to do incredible work there. And, I saw the power of investing in people early through, learning and development. We redid the values at Chime. I'm sorry, at Sunrun. And that was an incredibly powerful experience to see how things evolve as a company grows. It was, I think, probably some of the best work I've done in my career. And, to this day, I'm incredibly close to so many employees at Sunrun because of bonding around such a mission-driven company and experience.
And you mentioned, mission-driven and kind of the experience of the importance of being values aligned with the business. I know outside of work, you're very passionate about social causes as well. And as I hear you kind of describe what you really enjoyed about that, you can see the connectivity to being in that mission-driven, values-aligned organization. Where does that come from? Where does your kind of passion for these social initiatives come from for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when I was growing up, it was modeled for me from my family, from my mother, who did, was a stay-at-home mother, but took on a lot of work around kind of making the community better. And so I saw that as a model for me. And then I just, a couple things I think transformed my way of thinking about it. When I was at Nordstrom in the early days, I was incredibly fixated on my work and my career, and in a way that was likely unhealthy. And I had, a kind of, moment where I said to myself, what am I doing? I've become such a one-dimensional person, and I'm not doing the things outside of work that I have a lot of skill in and ability to do. And I decided, that I was going to change that. And so I started doing a lot of work in the Chicago community, it's no longer there, but in the Cabrini Green housing project. And I just, am a happier and better human being when I am investing my time in the pursuit of helping other people, also be successful. And so it is now a very big part of my life. I spend a lot of my outside time on things that are important to me. Some of them I bring to companies that I work with. One of the programs that I've been heavily involved in is a program that is from the State Department called Tech Women. And that program inspires women in Africa, in Central Asia and the Middle East to be in the STEM fields. It's just an incredibly powerful program that transforms economies of countries when women are in the workforce and are productive members of the workforce. And women come to the US from those countries and learn about how we do things here and gain experience and mentorship. And then they go back to their home countries and inspire others to do so. And so I'm bringing that program to Chime this spring. And I've had the incredible opportunity to travel on behalf of the State Department to a number of different countries: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tunisia, Kenya, Rwanda, some others, to advocate for women in the STEM fields, for local governments, universities, and with the U.S. Embassy. So as you can tell, how I get so animated when I talk about this, it's just an incredible part of my life. And, I don't try to focus on happiness. I know that might seem a little strange to people. I find that I am happiest when I'm doing things that are meaningful. And so that's what I really try to focus on in my life.
Yeah, I think one of the last times we actually met in person was maybe a week or so before one of your last trips, for the State Department. So
I think so.
I remember talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'd love to get your perspective on as well. I think when you look at the broader kind of environment that we are in, and by we I mean society, HR, there are lots of big kind of flashpoint events that have been happening over the last couple of years. The pandemic, obviously, the murder of George Floyd, the conversation around Black Lives Matter, political discourse and turmoil, both domestically and globally. And I think it puts the role of a CPO, of a CHRO, in a unique position as they help their executives and their CEO and frankly their employees navigate those waters. And I'm just curious, like from your perspective, what advice do you have for people leaders in those similar scenarios? Because I think there's a lot of cases lately where, the HR chief has kind of been pushed to the forefront almost as a spokesperson, in some cases over the CEO. And I know some people are made for that and they want to be in that position. Others are not, and it's difficult for them to be so. So I'd love to just get your perspective if you have any advice for people leaders navigating those waters.
Yeah. I think obviously in these last few years, we've had such a unique situation for people in my role with so much happening externally, as you mentioned. And I think, for me, what I like to try to think through is, what is important to the employees of Chime, what is important to our members, those are our customers, and, giving people internally a voice. I don't necessarily believe in shutting down, discussion and discourse. I think that is good for companies. I know some other companies have decided, that is not in their ethos to do so. But when I think about the values of Chime and the mission of Chime, it does align for us. And so that's, the framework that I use is it a issue or a subject that is important internally and important to our members externally. And, sometimes it's hard because things come up and, there are a lot of things going on in the world that are incredibly important right now. And, we've had to decide at Chime what are some of the things that we're going to speak about publicly, both internally and externally, and what are those things that, we're not. And I think you need to come up with a framework inside your company and, kind of stick to that and be open and transparent with your employees about it so they understand where you're coming from when you're choosing to speak and when you're choosing not to speak.
I think that's great advice. I think that'll be helpful for a lot of leaders who are listening and maybe they're in this role for the first time and they haven't had to make these kind of decisions. They haven't had to guide their C-suite kind of peers through some of these situations. So I appreciate that. You mentioned, you've been at Chime for 2 years. You gave a bit of an overview of kind of what Chime does. You've grown quite a bit in that 2-year period. So
we sure have.
Walk me through the growth and then walk me through like as a leader, like how do you think about designing your kind of people operating systems to scale?
So, Chime, we've grown incredibly quickly. So when I started with the company a little over 2 years ago, we were about maybe not quite 200, but close to 200. And today we are probably north of 1,300. And so the majority of the growth of the company has happened, during the pandemic, which is, it's certainly a challenge in itself. And when I started with the company, I think there were 3 other people on the people side of things and about 15 people on the talent side. And now combined, we're about 80 people. So, my team has grown considerably. And how I like to think about scale is not to think about today, but to think about tomorrow, and to try to prepare systems and process and set up the organization in a way that is going to be prepared for what is next and not, constantly on our heels. So a couple of examples of that and things that I think that we did at Chime that turned out to be very good decisions, albeit potentially controversial at the time. I brought in a people partner function early, HR business partner function, as it's more commonly known. And I think that was a really smart decision. I brought in two very senior people, one on the tech side, one on the non-tech side. And that really gave my team the ability to understand the business very intimately, to develop close relationships with leaders, and to really prove that this department is about driving business outcomes. And so I think that was a great early move that we did. We also brought in talent operations, employment brand, and people analytics early. And, again, we did that because we were really thinking about the future. And Chime was not known at all when I joined. And, we really had to amplify our brand in a very systematic way. I rely heavily on data, and as my talent leader, Jeff Winter, does. And so us having that capability in-house early, I believe, did a lot of great things. It helped us prove out, decisions that we wanted to make based on the data. It made us incredibly efficient around things like capacity planning for recruiting. It gave us the ability to share people metrics across the company early, to demonstrate what we were doing well and where we had gaps as a company. And so, I think some of those early investments make a very big difference. And I think the other early investment we made, first financially and then by building out the function, was around leadership development. And I often find that companies that are emerging do not want to spend the resources, the time, the money to develop leaders. And, I think that is a huge mistake. I say this all the time. Leadership is a skill and a craft. It must be learned. It must be practiced, just like any other competency that you want people to have. And if you don't do that, you will end up playing cleanup on aisle 5 more than you will, really helping to move the business forward. So those are a lot of, kind of my tips of what you do early. I would say I'm fortunate that, my boss, my CEO and our co-founder, they supported me in this. To be honest, I think they were like, I have no idea what she's doing right now, but let's let her do it and see what happens. Because I did get I was able to make the case to get the financial investment to do it. But I think all people leaders should build a business plan like anybody builds a business plan, and, sell that plan and, make sure that you're clear about the return on investment. And that's what we did at Chime.
Yeah. I'd love to actually go a little deeper on that last point, because I think it's so valid in terms of the business plan to be able to justify the dollars, because
it is
conceptually, very few CEOs are going to be like, no, I don't really, we don't really care about leadership development. We don't really care about, being able to recruit more effectively. We, all these things, like, it's easy to say, like, yes, conceptually we should do that. It's another thing to write a check.
That's right.
To do that. And I'm curious to get your perspective, because I think making that business case for investment is not typically a skill that is in any HR curriculum, right?
It
like
isn't.
we're typically learning that on the fly. So what have you found to be effective? Like when you're trying to craft that business case for investment in those programs, are there any, models that you use? Are there any particular, data or ways that you kind of frame the outcomes you're working towards that make that more effective?
Yeah, I've not thought about it in that way before, but I'm sure there is. I mean, first of all, I think my team is very clear and was very clear from day one on what the company could count on us to do. And, we take that responsibility very seriously. In terms of making the case, we use a lot of data at Chime, and we measure the effectiveness of our programs. Some of them we have the quantitative ability to see what difference it's making through things like looking at engagement scores. For example, I can prove out through our engagement survey that leaders who participated in one of our learning and development programs or coaching programs had an average of 7 points higher than leaders who did not. And on some questions around giving feedback, up to 9 points higher on average. So I really try to say with data, what we are doing is working and we just need to stay the course. Other things that we've done, and I've done this throughout my career, is ask the opinions of others. And, when we have a program, when we're thinking through different programs that we're doing, we ask people. We get a small group of trusted people together and say, hey, this is how we're thinking about approaching performance management. And here's why. What do you think about that? And, I think it does a lot of things. It gets you buy-in and, support across the organization. It can give you insight that perhaps you didn't have before. And I think it provides some champions for us throughout the organization. And then we always ask, how did it go? We do, like I said, we do a lot of surveying of, the effectiveness of the programs that we put out. And so, I think you just have to think about your role, just like any other role, that you have to make sure you are driving the success of the business and you're able to prove through data that what you're doing is actually accomplishing that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And especially, being able to bring the actual results of programs you've already launched. So you can specifically say, like, here's the difference. Like,
That's right.
It's clear. It's right here. The data, these numbers are, tell the story better than just an anecdote.
That's right.
You've worked with a lot of CEOs over your career. And I think especially now, like the relationship between the HR executive and the CEO is instrumental on both sides, right?
Is.
For both the CEO and for the head of HR. And so I'm curious, like the job market, as you know, right now in HR
Crazy.
is white hot. We've never seen anything like this. And so many companies are either upgrading their people executives or hiring people executives at a much earlier stage, even at the A stage, right? Where maybe they hadn't in the past. What advice do you have for people who are maybe moving into that role for the first time, second time? How should they be trying to really, position themselves and maybe invest in those relationships with their CEOs so they can have a productive outcomes for the business and the team and the organization?
Yeah, I think you've got to go into the relationship with the CEO understanding that they're probably not going to understand a lot of the things that you're doing. And, I think where you have to be aligned is on your values. And, I would highly recommend to any person going for a role in being a chief people officer or a leader of people if you and your CEO are not aligned on what you think is important in terms from a values perspective, it is never, ever going to work. And, I think what I find is certainly there are things that my CEO and I disagree on. And, we come from different perspectives on it on a number of different things. Sometimes I change his mind. Sometimes he changes my mind. But at the end of the day, I know who he is as a human being. I know what his values are as a human being. And so that allows us, I think, to find common ground, even when we may not, want to approach the problem in the same way. And so I think that is incredibly important, probably the most important thing when you are going into a new job and trying to decide if this is the right role for you on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. For whatever reason, when we kind of scheduled this podcast, I was thinking back to a conversation we had at one point, and this was years ago. I don't remember when, but it was about the importance of courage as an HR leader. And you made a comment that still kind of resonates with me. It was just, sometimes as an HR leader, you need to know when it's time to kind of stand up from the table, throw your key card across the table, and walk away. And I think especially in this incredibly complex world that we're in right now, that value alignment, I think that's great advice in terms of that connection with the CEO needs to be there. But when do you, as a people leader, when do you know it's time to leave? When do you know? And maybe it's like a clear event that is a conflict and it's like, yes, this is insurmountable. Maybe it's slow creep where you're like, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but then you run out of benefits of the doubt, right? Like when do you know it's time to move on?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question and a complicated one. I would say for myself, there's a tool that I use in my company called the IDI, which is a inventory of where you get your energy. And there's a category that's called irreproachability, which is, sort of what it sounds like, you live by a certain doctrine. I'm 99 on that. And so, through the years and through my own maturity, I have had to realize that, there needs to be a continuum of things of there's no way I'm going to ever deal with this, or maybe this is something that I can get past and help move through and make it better. And so I think I've matured in that way over the years. And I do think that having courage in this role is incredibly important because often, and incredibly difficult, by the way, as well. You are often, the only person who is telling the truth to the senior leaders. Most everything, good and bad, that is happening in the company. And I think it is one of the things that makes this job so difficult is that you have to be able to sort through, what your boundaries are around what happens in the workplace. For me, things that are unethical are just that to me is, I won't do that. And that is where I would never do anything unethical, and I would leave a company and have left companies, before I would be party to things that I thought were wrong or unethical. I also know courage is a privilege in many ways. And, if you are newer in your career, if you, have not made money and that job is really important to you, I realize that not everybody can take the steps that some people can take. Besides, things that are ethical, which are, somewhat more black and white, I think, sometimes there's a point in a company where you're no longer being heard. You're no longer able to make change and make impact. And there might be a variety of reasons why that is. Some might be about you, some might be about the company. But I think for me, that's also a signal that there's probably someone better that can do this job than I can. So those are the two things that I think about.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting to kind of hear you frame it that way. And I agree with everything you said. I want to put one more question in front of you before we kind of move on to the lightning round. You've seen the industry evolve, quite a bit, and kind of we're in this new chapter of work where I'm just incredibly bullish on our future and our ability to actually write this new chapter of work together, right? This, like, the future of work was yesterday. What we're building is new. And I'm curious to get your perspective. Like, when you think about what's ahead of us, what gets you, and when I say us, the field of HR, what gets you most excited?
Yeah. I mean, so many things. And I've been doing this for a long time as you have. And I think it is very gratifying for me to see that this field, has had its day in many ways, that, the way that people in this role helped navigate companies over the last couple of years has been incredible. I think it's taken an incredible, it's been incredibly difficult, as you and I know. Many people are leaving their roles and are saying, I'm not going to do this again. I think what's exciting for me is, the idea of talent can be anywhere. And that to me is really exciting. I also think about things like, are there different constructs of roles and jobs that may happen in the future? Maybe somebody, is an advisor to a bunch of companies, but has no full-time role. And they're able to add value to a lot of different companies and feel gratified by their work. So I think the way that we think about employment is likely going to change over the next decade or so. And I think that's really exciting. I also think that, the whole understanding that people need to continually learn and grow and acquire skills and be curious, and that's what makes somebody great at work. I think that is really exciting, both in terms of seeing the democratization of coaching through some of the great, platforms like, Sounding Board and Better Up that are out there. I think that is incredibly exciting. And I also think it's exciting that it is no longer, a taboo if you move jobs. I think there's more of a realization that companies evolve, people evolve, and people are going to change jobs, and that's okay. And I think all of those things, coupled with just so much amazing technology that, was never there when I first started, is, making these roles incredibly exciting over the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, you raised such a great point, I think, on the actual nature of work itself changing, like the profile of work, and like, what does it mean to work? And
That's
how
right.
do we work? Like, it's like, FTEs is not the only way.
That's right.
And it's really interesting to see how this is going to evolve. I think that, coupled with this kind of humanity shaping event of the pandemic, where a lot of people, reoriented what their values are and what's important to them.
That's right. And
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, both of us have a connection to, mental health or issues that have happened to people very close to us. I also think it's incredibly important that companies understand that, whole people come to work. And people who are going to have challenges. And, 10 years ago, we would have never talked about the importance of mental health at work. And now you've got to, if you want to be a desirable employer and you want employees that are, focused on well-being, you need to have those offerings for your people. And I think, that's an incredibly positive change that I've also seen in the world of work.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think particularly even when you look at leaders, I think that for a long time, your personas, and
For
not
sure.
you specifically, but like leaders, like you had this air, it was infallibility,
That's
said
right.
the right things, dressed the right way.
Yeah.
And there's no, no messiness, but there's messiness to all
Totally.
of us. And I think, we're much more comfortable owning that. And I think especially in the conversation of mental health, when we as leaders can role model that behavior from our own lives,
That's right.
it makes that more real and tangible, and kind of, creates that space where employees are more comfortable showing up that way and asking for help when they need it, which makes a huge difference.
I agree. I mean, I think that, vulnerability used to be a taboo word, and now I feel like vulnerability is a superpower. I really do.
Well, Beth, it was awesome, learning more about your career path, what you're building, and kind of sharing a lot of your leadership wisdom with the audience. I want to shift over to the lightning round, which we close every episode with, just to help the audience get to know you a little bit better. So you ready to jump in?
Sure.
Okay, I am checking out your Spotify playlist. Who will I learn are your top 3 artists?
Okay, so I am a huge fan of the band The National.
Okay.
They are my number one. I mean, I'm sort of crazy for The National. I also like Julian Baker, who maybe people haven't heard of, but she's an incredible singer and songwriter. And then Eddie Vedder, probably my third. I'm also a yacht rock fan, which I think you are too.
We share that. I remember you shared me you have a great Spotify playlist.
I do have a good yacht rock playlist.
I am down with some yacht rock. Shift over to TV. What was your latest binge watch? So
my latest binge watch, I like these obscure foreign dramas. So I watched a French drama called Spiral, crime drama, and that was my latest binge. Also Gomorrah, which is a Italian crime drama. The last season just came out, and I think I watched it all in like a 24-hour period. So
wow. All right, I'll have to keep an eye out for those.
Yeah.
If you weren't working in HR, I know you've done a range of things from being a practitioner to being an advisor, being an investor. I'll take all those things off the table.
Yes.
What would you be doing?
Well, I mean, I think about what I'm going to do when I retire. I could answer that, but yeah. I'm also I'm very creative as well. I like flower arranging. Maybe I would be a floral designer. I make a lot of my own homemade nocino and limoncello and craft cocktails. So maybe I would do that. I think when I retire, I will be a coach, and I would like to work on refugee resettlement in the United States.
And Beth, last question for you. Who is one HR leader who you admire and why?
I really admire Katie Burke at HubSpot. And I think, they've done an incredible job of scaling and keeping a really authentic, amazing culture. I really admire and have kind of followed her in the way that she engages with employees on digital formats like LinkedIn. And, I think it's a very small thing to do, but makes a very big impact to people. And I think she's an incredibly smart and thoughtful leader.
Yeah, I second all of that. And if you're not following Katie on LinkedIn, please do that, because the way that she interacts with her employees,
great.
And the way that she even, she had a brilliant piece that she wrote. I think she's actually done a few iterations of it now, where proactively answering some of the questions that candidates typically have.
I love that.
Who are interviewing. And it was great. Things like that. So smart.
Yeah.
And so anybody watching can do that.
Yeah.
Right?
She's a very accessible leader. And I think that's, that is what modern leaders look like.
Yeah. Well, Beth, I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your journey and your wisdom with all of us. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up live someday soon.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real honor.